It all started with a gut feeling. You know, that little voice in the back of your head that whispers something's off, even when everything seems fine on the surface. I was away on a business trip, the kind that stretches for weeks, leaving you exhausted and longing for home. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for 7 years. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I never imagined she'd be capable of what I discovered. The first red flag came when I called her one evening. She sounded distant, almost annoyed that I'd interrupted her. "I'm just tired," she said, brushing off my concern. But it wasn't just her tone. It was the background noise. I could hear faint laughter, the clinking of glasses, and what sounded like a man's voice. When I asked where she was, she hesitated. "Just at a friend's place," she replied quickly. Too quickly. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the next day, I got a text from an old college buddy, Mark. "Hey man, saw Sarah at a bar last night. She looked different. Just thought you should know." Different. What did that even mean? My mind raced, but I couldn't confront her over the phone. I needed to see her face when I asked the hard questions. When I finally returned home, I expected Sarah to greet me with her usual warmth. Instead, she seemed off. Her hugs were stiff, her kisses perfunctory. She avoided eye contact, busying herself with trivial tasks. That's when I noticed the little things, the new perfume she never wore before, the late-night girls' nights that seemed to happen more frequently, the way her phone was always face down. One night, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was. Proof of betrayal. Not with one man, but 5. 5 different conversations, each more damning than the last. Flirty, texts, plans to meet up, even photos I wish I could unsee. My heart sank as I read the words. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Don't tell my husband." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. How could she do this? Was our marriage a lie? I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. And what I found would shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at Sarah, I saw a stranger. I started piecing together the timeline of her affairs, and it was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, or a fleeting attraction. She had been seeing these men for months, juggling them like some twisted game. Each one had a role. Some were co-workers, others old friends, and a few were complete strangers she'd met online. The sheer scale of it left me numb. I began to notice patterns. She'd often go out with the girls on weekends, but her stories never added up. One night she claimed she was at a friend's birthday party, but I found out later that the friend hadn't celebrated anything. Another time she said she was working late, but her office was closed that day. The lies were piling up, and I felt like I was living in a house of cards, waiting for it all to collapse. I decided to confront one of the men. His name was Jake, a guy she worked with. I found his number in her phone and called him, pretending to be someone else. He was friendly, unsuspecting, and within minutes, he was bragging about his fling with Sarah. My stomach churned as he described their dates, the hotels they'd stayed at, the things they'd done. He had no idea who I was, and that made it even worse. I hung up, feeling sick to my core. But Jake was just the beginning. There was also Mike, an old high school friend she'd reconnected with on social media. Then there was Chris, a guy she'd met at the gym, and Ryan, someone she'd been chatting with on a dating app. Each one had a story. Each one had a piece of my wife that I thought belonged only to me. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep the betrayal went. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to my growing suspicion. She carried on as if nothing was wrong, smiling at me over breakfast, asking about my day, even initiating intimacy as if to reassure me. But every touch felt hollow. Every word felt like a lie. I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand the truth. But I held back. I needed more evidence, more proof that this wasn't just some horrible misunderstanding. Then, one night, it all came to a head. Sarah's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I picked it up, my heart pounding, and saw a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Same place as last time?" My hands shook as I read the words. Same place as last time? What did that mean? Where had they been meeting? My mind raced, and before I could stop myself, I replied, pretending to be Sarah. "Where again? I forgot." The response came quickly. "The motel on 5th, room 12-9. p.m. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. A motel? Room 12? This wasn't just some casual fling, this was planned, deliberate. I checked the time. It was 8:15. If I left now, I could catch them. The thought made me nauseous, but I knew I had to see it for myself. I grabbed my keys, my hands trembling, and headed out the door. The drive to the motel felt like an eternity. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. How could she do this to me? To us? I kept replaying our happiest memories in my head, trying to make sense of it all. But nothing could prepare me for what I was about to see. When I arrived, I parked a few spaces away from room 12 and waited. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. And then, at exactly 9 p.m., I saw her. Sarah walked up to the door, looking over her shoulder as if to make sure no one was watching. She knocked lightly and the door opened. A man I didn't recognize pulled her inside, and the door closed behind them. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. The moment that would change everything. I didn't know what to do: confront them, storm in and demand answers, or just drive away and never look back. In the end, I did none of those things. I sat there, watching the door, waiting for her to come out. And when she did, hours later, I followed her home. She had no idea I'd been there, no idea I'd seen everything. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about her infidelity. This was about me. What was I going to do? How was I going to move forward? The answers weren't clear. But one thing was certain. My life would never be the same. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head was pounding, my stomach in knots, and my heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. Sarah was already up, humming to herself in the kitchen as she made coffee. She looked so normal. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just shattered our marriage into a million pieces. I sat at the table, staring at her, trying to find the words to say. But what could I say? "Hey, honey, I followed you to a motel last night and watched you cheat on me?" It sounded insane, even in my head. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. She turned to me, smiling that same sweet smile I'd fallen in love with years ago. "Yeah?" she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. She knew something was wrong. "Okay," she said slowly, sitting down across from me. "What's going on?" I hesitated, my mind racing. How do you even begin a conversation like this? "I know," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know about the motel, about Jake, about Mike, Chris, Ryan. I know everything." Her face went pale, her coffee cup slipping from her hand and spilling onto the table. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew the game was up. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I saw the texts. I saw you last night. I know everything. Sarah, just tell me why. Why would you do this to us?" For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at the spilled coffee, her hands shaking. And then, to my surprise, she started to cry. Not the kind of crying you do when you're caught, real gut-wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what happened. I felt so alone, so invisible. You were always gone, always working, and I needed to feel something, anything, her." Words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to be angry, to scream at her, to tell her how much she'd hurt me, but all I felt was emptiness. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Because I was working too much? That's your excuse?" "No!" she cried, reaching for my hand. I pulled away and she flinched. "It's not an excuse. I'm not trying to justify what I did. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but I didn't know how to talk to you about how I was feeling. I didn't know how to fix us." I stared at her, trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to forgive her and try to move on. But the other part, the part that had seen her with another man, the part that had read those texts, knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern, a choice she'd made over and over again. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered. "I don't expect you to. But please, just tell me what you want to do. Do you want me to leave? Do you want a divorce? Just tell me, and I'll do it." I didn't have an answer. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, love. I still loved her despite everything. But was that enough? Could we ever come back from this? "I need time," I said finally, standing up. "I need to think. I don't know what I want right now, but I can't just pretend everything's okay. I need space." She nodded again, wiping her tears. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll give you space. Just, please don't shut me out completely. I know I don't deserve it, but I still love you. I never stopped loving you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her sitting there, crying. Didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that my life had been turned upside down, and I had no idea how to put it back together. I spent the next few days in a haze, crashing at a friend's place and avoiding Sarah's calls. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted into knots. I didn't know what to say to her. How do you even begin to process something like this? How do you decide whether to fight for a marriage that's been broken beyond repair or walk away and start over? My friends tried to help, but their advice only made things more confusing. Some told me to give her another chance, that people make mistakes and marriages can survive infidelity. Others said I should leave and never look back, that once trust is broken, it's impossible to rebuild. I didn't know who to listen to. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in limbo. Finally, after a week of silence, I decided to meet Sarah. We agreed to talk at a park, somewhere neutral where we could both feel safe. When I saw her, my heart ached. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She'd lost weight, and her usual confidence was gone. She looked broken, and part of me hated myself for being the cause of her pain. We sat on a bench, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Finally, she spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her voice trembling. "And I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I hurt you in the worst possible way, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, if you're willing to give me a chance." I stared at her, my mind racing. "How?" I asked. "How do we fix this? How do I trust you again after everything?" She took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "I've started therapy," she said. "I've been going every day since you left. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, why I let things get so out of control. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm serious about changing. I'll give you access to my phone, my emails, everything. I'll cut off contact with those men. I'll do whatever you need me to do to feel safe." Her words surprised me. I hadn't expected her to take responsibility like this. But even as she spoke, doubts crept in. Was this just another act? Was she saying what she thought I wanted to hear? Or was she genuinely trying to change? "I don't know if that's enough," I said finally. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Every time I look at you, all I see is the lies, the betrayal. I don't know if I can get past that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she whispered. And if you decide you can't forgive me, I'll respect that. I'll sign the divorce papers and I'll walk away. But I need you to know that I'm not giving up on us. Not yet. I love you, and I'm willing to fight for you, for us. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, I still loved her too. But love wasn't enough to fix this. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and ours had been shattered. Could we rebuild it? Or were we just delaying the inevitable? I need more time, I said finally. I need to figure out what I want, and I need you to give me space. No calls, no texts, no showing up at my friend's place. Just space. She nodded, wiping her tears. Okay, she said softly. I'll give you space, but please, don't shut me out completely. I know I don't deserve it, but I still believe in us. I still believe we can fix this. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I stood up and walked away, leaving her sitting on that bench crying. As I walked, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or just the faintest glimmer of it. But hope wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to figure out what I wanted, what I needed, and whether I could ever truly forgive her. And until I had those answers, I knew I couldn't go back. The weeks turned into months, and I threw myself into work, therapy, and self-reflection. I needed to understand not just what had happened, but who I was, and what I wanted moving forward. Sarah respected my space, just as she'd promised. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up unannounced, but she did send me a letter. Just one. It arrived in a plain white envelope, her handwriting unmistakable on the front. I waited days before opening it. When I finally did, her words hit me like a tidal wave. She didn't make excuses or beg for forgiveness. Instead, she took full responsibility for her actions. She wrote about the therapy sessions she'd been attending, the books she'd been reading, and the painful self-discovery she'd gone through. She admitted that her infidelity wasn't about me or our marriage. It was about her own insecurities, her fear of being alone, and her inability to communicate her needs. She didn't ask for a second chance. She simply said she hoped I could find peace, whether that was with her or without her. Her letter stayed with me, playing on repeat in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman I'd fallen in love with, the life we'd built together, and the future we'd dreamed of. But I also couldn't forget the betrayal, the lies, and the pain she'd caused. It felt like I was standing at a crossroads, and no matter which path I chose, I'd lose something. Finally, I made a decision. I reached out to Sarah and asked her to meet me. We chose a quiet cafe, somewhere neutral where we could talk without distractions. When I saw her, my heart ached. She looked different, lighter somehow, but also more vulnerable. She'd cut her hair, and there was a quiet strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. We sat down, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. I read your letter, I said, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about what happened, about what I want. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I understand, she said softly. And whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I just want you to be happy. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, I said. What you did, it broke something in me, and I don't know if that can ever be fixed. She nodded again, tears welling up in her eyes. I know, she whispered, and I'm so sorry for that. I never wanted to hurt you. But, I continued, my voice trembling, I also know that I still love you. And I believe that people can change. I've seen the work you've been doing, and I can see how hard you're trying. And I think I'm willing to try. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. And it's going to take a lot of work from both of us. She looked at me, her eyes wide, with hope and disbelief. Are you saying you're willing to give us another chance? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Yes, but it's not going to be the same. We're going to have to rebuild everything. Our trust, our communication, our relationship. And it's going to be hard. But if you're willing to put in the work, then so am I. She reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. I'm willing, she said, her voice breaking. I'll do whatever it takes. I love you, and I'm not giving up on us. We sat there for a long time, holding hands and crying, as the weight of everything we'd been through settled over us. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet, but it was a beginning. A chance to start over, to build something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. To everyone who's been following this story, thank you for sticking with me until the end. This has been one of the hardest things I've ever gone through, and sharing it with you has been both painful and cathartic. I don't know what the future holds for Sarah and me, but I do know that we're both committed to trying, and that's enough for now. If you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my situation? Do you think it's possible to rebuild trust after something like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and check out my other videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.